everyone. And for those of you who do not know me, I am Julia Zerniak, and I serve as the Dean of the School of Architecture and Planning. And I'm very happy to welcome you to Reimagining Black Futures During the Age of Authoritarianism. And the second part of that, equally as important, is 100 years of celebrating Black history. For as the participants will surely illuminate, and I learned last year from Dr. Henry Taylor, it was February 1926, and he'll tell the story better, that Dr. Carter Woodson founded what was to become Black History Month. And here we are talking about a brighter future still, envisioning a free Black people in a more democratic and just United States. So I'm thrilled to welcome our panel, both visitors to and faculty within our campus. I'm also very happy to welcome friend, colleague, and Dr. Keith Alford, who's Dean and Professor of UB School of Social Work, who generously helped to support this event, along with UB's Office of Inclusive Excellence. Also, a few other shout outs to Emmanuel Frimbaum-Boma and Dr. Henry Louis Taylor, who put this panel discussion together. The student groups Double ASAP and NOMAS, Camden Miller, Albert Chow, Semendi Bryce, Sarah Cunningham, Sydney Landis, and of course, Ashley Godoy, for which nothing would happen without her organization. So I so look forward to this conversation. And if last year's event is any indication, we will all leave tonight not just feeling the impact of the organizing question, which is, what does a nation where Black people are free and liberated look like, but have an emerging sense of the ways forward. So now I welcome, who am I welcoming? Oh, okay, please.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Sid Clark. I am a second-year Master's of Urban Planning student, as well as the GPSA president, and I will be introducing your panel today. Okay, so first, I would like to start with Dr. Henry Louis Taylor. Dr. Henry Louis is a faculty member of the Department of Urban and Regional Planning. Taylor is a founding director of the UB Center for Urban Studies and the associate director to the UB Community Health Equity Research Institute. A historian and an urban planner, Taylor has written or edited 5 books and authored more than 100 articles and technical reports. His scholarship focused on underdeveloped Black neighborhoods, racial and spatial inequality, and strategies for neighborhood transformation. Next is Dr. Lisa K. Bates, a professor at Portland State University. Dr. Bates is a professor in the Department of Black Studies at Portland State University. She earned her PhD in City and Regional Planning in 2006 from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Her research and practice include deep engagement with community-based organizations working towards racial justice and housing rights, including Portland's Anti-Displacement Coalition. Bates' work has been recognized with the 2019 UAA Sage Marilyn J. Gattell Activist Scholar Award. Next is Dr. Prentice Dantzler, Associate Professor at the University of Toronto. Dantzler is an Associate Professor with the Department of Sociology at the University of Toronto and the founding director of the Housing Justice Lab within the School of Cities. His interdisciplinary, community-engaged research focuses on housing policy, neighborhood change, urban poverty, race and ethnic relations, and community development. He holds cross appointments in the School of Cities, the Infrastructure Institute, the Department of Geography and Planning, and the Department of Social Justice Education at the University of Toronto, and has published widely on these topics. Dantzler earned his PhD in Public Affairs with a concentration in community development from Rutgers University, Camden. Next is Dr. Jamal B. Williams. Dr. Jamal is an assistant professor at the UB Jacobs School for Medicine and Biomedical Sciences. Dr. Williams is an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry in the UB School of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences. He holds degrees in mathematics, biology, and a PhD in neuroscience. His research focuses on the neurobiological and neurogenetic bases of neurodevelopmental disorders, employing multi-ethnic ancestry analysis to examine genetic risks across diverse populations. A child health activist, he founded the Community Health Speaks initiative and co-created the Health Equity Ambassador Program at UB, connecting the university with the Western New York community to address health disparities and train local leaders as community health workers. Finally, I would like to introduce your moderator for tonight. Your moderator is Dr. Keith A. Alford. Dr. Keith is a dean at the School of Social Work. And since joining UB in 2021, Alford has led the School of Social Work through a period of growth and stability and launched a 5-year strategic plan to expand our impact on diverse populations we serve. A former child protective services worker and therapeutic foster care supervisor, Alfred has devoted his professional life to serving and researching the needs of children and families. In 2025, the National Association of Social Workers named Alfred an NSW Social Work Pioneer, one of the profession's highest honors. And if you would join me in welcoming Dr. Alfred to the stage.
Thank you so much, Sid. I really appreciate that very warm introduction. And good evening to everyone. Good evening. It is really a brave thing to come out in this cold weather, and you did it. So thank you to all those in the room and also to all those on Zoom. And of course, as Sid shared, I am Keith Alford, Dean and Professor at UB School of Social Work. Now, this Black History Month centennial invites us to consider how far we've come and how incomplete the work remains. It reminds us that the making of history is in constant motion. And in my opinion, Black History Month could use a few extra additional days. After all, there are only 28 days in February. Nonetheless, the magnitude of this month challenges us to examine whose knowledge is centered, whose experiences are legitimized, and whose stories are still marginalized or even being erased. For those of us in social work education, this moment is especially significant. My profession is grounded in the commitment or commitments to social justice, human dignity, and the dismantling of structural inequities. I am honored that we were asked to support this forum because indeed, the School of Architecture and Planning shares our value base. Engaging Black history is not an add-on to the quest for social and racial justice. It is fundamental, in my opinion. It helps us better to understand the roots of racial inequity, resilience, community organizing, and resistance, as well as the ongoing impact of racism on individuals, families, communities, and systems today. All of us here knows or has some notion that the real and vital work of uplifting humanity is cultivating the courage to move from rhetoric to action. Here at UB, we're digging deep. We are digging deep into ourselves to be catalysts for change, even in the face of extreme obstacles. As you ponder what will be shared this evening, I hope that knowledge of your ability to adapt and persevere will be encoded in your thinking, bridging any newfound knowledge with your own intellectual prowess. You've heard the African proverb or African American proverb, each one teach one, which simply means we must help to foster growth in others and seek opportunities to collaborate, to build community, to engage in camaraderie. Our robust panel discussion this evening will surely take a deep dive, but do so from the landing perch of reimagination. We can see that our values are being tested. Am I right about it? Populations we serve in urban planning and in social welfare are feeling the brunt of vulnerability. Yes, they are feeling threatened. With that being said, we also know that the critical work of elevating humankind will always be vital. For Black futures, what does this mean? And how can this, if you will, be affirming and inclusive in terms of reimagining, particularly in authoritarian times? Again, our esteemed panelists will unpack, assess, poignantly address this very premise and more. My job as moderator is to draw out the wealth of knowledge that they will bring, but also help all of us along the process tonight, because we too will share. Each panelist will have 5 minutes to make an opening statement, outlining their perspective on this year's theme of Reimagine Black Futures during the age of authoritarianism. After which, we will begin the panel discussion in earnest. This, of course, will progress in time with a Q&A, as well as a Q&A from audience members and our Zoom audience as well. Thank you. Thank you again for your attendance this evening. And now you will hear from Dr. Bates, Dr. Dantzler, Dr. Williams, and Dr. Taylor in that order, their opening remarks.
Good evening. I think we're on. We're good? Great. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited about this dialogue. So as Sid capably shared my bio, my academic home is in Black Studies. And I think of Black Studies as a vantage point from which we can do a lot of really productive thinking about the questions of this evening. Black History Month is 100 years old. Obviously, Black study is old. I mean, we've been studying and thinking about defining ourselves since Blackness was created by the Middle Passage across the Atlantic. But Black studies as a discipline at the university is younger. It's about 60 years old. And it's something that comes out of community demand and community and student insistence that there be an academic home for thinking about Black history and Black futures inside the university. And insisting that Black history is worthy of being central to a university, but also that we're a little bit different. What Robin D.G. Kelly calls a practice of love, study, and struggle that is not quite like a traditional academic discipline. And I think it's a way that we can, see them, see us, and also see the institution. And I want to talk about each of those things really briefly. So one thing I think that Black Studies does for us in this moment is it allows us to see them. It's Black looking back. In 1920, W.E.B. Du Bois, in The Souls of White Folks, wrote, "Of them I am singularly clairvoyant. I see in and through them. I view them from unusual points of vantage. And always, somehow, some way, silently but clearly, I am given to understand that whiteness is the ownership of the earth forever and ever. Amen." And Du Bois is very clear that whiteness is not like a phenotypical condition. It's actually quite elastic sociopolitical definition that people can be added to or subtracted from, and that it is deeply interconnected with power and with ownership in a system of capitalist domination, that those things are not separable. And understanding that and using those tools to look at systems, structures, and choices that people are making with their agency, I think is really important in this moment to understand like who's doing what, who's exercising exactly what power and how, from the micro everyday practices of a landlord choosing to file an eviction to a an agent of the federal government choosing to take a job where they terrorize human beings, to like really be very clear about exactly who and how to focus our lens of inquiry on when we ask questions about what's happening, the mechanisms, the instruments, the institutional arrangements, the cultural norms, right, that emerge and are reinforced continuously to create the conditions that we're in. That's that repression side of the agenda. But I think we also have a really powerful and incredible lens for seeing us, right? The resistance, the resilience, the love, the struggle part that oftentimes in a traditional social science world, certainly as a city planner, the orientation was often about pathologizing. It was about delineating what's wrong with Black people that we remain so underdeveloped, not who underdeveloped us, not who made choices to disinvest in this neighborhood, but what's wrong with us that we can't just pick it up and engage and sort of merge into the system. And I take really seriously the charge that we, as Black scholars, as Black thinkers, as Black practitioners, have a different role that we can play in using the tools that we have, research and professional tools that we have to highlight different things, to speak about different things. One of my favorite urban planners of all time, the late Clyde Woods, talked about the tool being like a scalpel, that a scalpel in the hands of a coroner can only do an autopsy. But the very same tool in the hands of the surgeon, right, can heal, can bring life back, can be a tool for creating, right, not only necroscopy. And he challenged us in planning academia to ask the question, why are we autopsying? Is the patient even dead? Right? And our history and our present day, I think, when we use that lens, right, is incredibly fruitful for understanding the moment that we're in and where we go next, what tools we have always had for survival, and the seeds for the next world are part of our knowledge heritage. They're not in the flashcards of Black History Month. They're actually in a deeper study of like what we did and how we did it, right? So, I teach a class on Black cooperative economics where we talk about Fannie Lou Hamer parceling out piglets to women to raise in their front yards. It was like a protein bank. It was an economic development tool. It was a communal practice. We also bring that to today to look at an organization like 1DC, which supports poor tenants of color in Washington, D.C., to collectively purchase their own buildings and turn them into co-op housing. And one of 1DC's practices is that they insist that people study the history of Black cooperative economics to understand how it was done, how it was sometimes undone by external forces, but to really understand, like, what does it take to do this kind of a project? Right, the systems of domination, those people who are committed to white supremacy, to capitalist domination, etc., their best laid plans, their favorite visions have never come to fruition all the way. They've never been able to fully manifest because we've always been there resisting, sidestepping, building something else. And so learning that how, building for this stage, I think is really a crucial act that we can take during Black History Month. And then finally, I think when we think about the space that we're in the university and the possibilities that we have from this unique space, Black studies is in the university. Black faculty are in the university. We're also kind of like not really of it, because it emerged from community demand and student demand, we're something a little bit separate. And I see that we can follow, we say all the time in Black studies at Portland State that we're a maroon colony inside the university. The maroons, those escaped from slavery who were living in the swamps in the mountains of Jamaica, they're stealing constantly, stealing with the slow movement, taking any moment possible on the plantation to not do the work, right? Might look like putting the community report before the journal publication, right? Doing the presentation and working with folks on the ground to get that knowledge, that rich knowledge right instead of speeding ahead to have a fancy paper. Stealing labor, material, and resources to escape as an enslaved person was an act of theft. It was stealing the property of yourself away, right? That's why the Fugitive Slave Act said come and take those people back. And to think about how can I steal away my own labor from the university? How do I let the community auditor sit in the class without paying the fee? How do I share books, share articles? How do I create a fiscal sponsorship for a grant for a community-based organization, or ensure that advisors are being paid fairly to help us with our projects in the university? And I think really importantly, to become accountable, really accountable to the community and to a really specific community and a community project, to be in right relationship with the people that we're working with, not to be extractive, not to use it as decoration, but to say, hey, we believe in this wisdom generation that happens from, I was going to say from the bottom up, but I don't want to suggest that people in the community are on the bottom. It's like, it's wisdom and knowledge creation from every possible direction and dimension, recognizing that academia is not the only place that holds like truth. And to try to prioritize the kind of questions that are of and by the community. And in some ways to do that, even when it doesn't mean getting the academic prestige and accolades that we are also, enjoy having. June Jordan, one of my favorite ever Black Studies professors, poet, activist, talked about how the emergence of Black Studies at CUNY, City University of New York, was a way to break the notion that the university is there to assure the undisturbed perpetuity of our civilization. How can we use what we have here to actually disrupt the perpetuity of that civilization, to plant those seeds, to dream these freedom dreams through our love, study, and struggle? I come from a professional background in city planning that says, as our first ethical principle is that we shall seek social justice. And of course, I believe that. But understanding what that is and how we're going to do that, I think could never come solely from a viewpoint of institutional power and social privilege. I think it has to be done from the standpoint of Black study, Blacks studying together, and Black studies, any person, anybody studying what our history and experiences have brought us to today and the possibilities that we have.
You. All right, it's working. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for everybody that put this on. Emmanuel, thank you, Sarah, Ashley, everybody. I had notes, but I'm gonna switch it up just a little bit because Lisa remind me of what today is, but also what year it is. And so 2026, I'm on sabbatical this year, which is probably the best time a faculty member can ever have in their career because you're away from your campus and you don't have to teach or do anything or service or committee meeting. Part of that is that it's also 10 years since I graduated with my PhD, right? And so being in this space right now is like a little weird to me. It's also 10 years anniversary of my grandmother's death, right? And so all these kind of moments are hitting me right now with you saying this. And so I think a lot of the conversations we had today was that a lot of the work I end up doing is translating stuff that I know my family already knows, right? They know what it means to not have food for a night. They know what it means to kind of play around with bill collectors, right? They know what it means to rely on neighbors for mutual aid and support. They know the church as a space that they could always go to for all types of different types of support, just not on a Sunday, right? I think today what we need to remind ourselves is like Black is not just being an identity, it's also certain types of politics in terms of how we approach this. And so in many ways, the idea of Black history is not just a day of remembrance, it's not a month of remembrance, it's a month of instruction. It tells us and shows us the task and the duties and the obstacles that people before us have come to do and ways to kind of overcome any type of situation that we're particularly in the space. And so I was trained in the public policy department. I was telling some of the students earlier, and luckily sociology gave me a job and I've been in this space trying to kind of rethink what sociology is as a discipline for a long time. One of the big reasons is that when I got my first job at Colorado, I had to teach social theory. So not being trained in it, I go to the formal syllabus and see what was taught. And the first thing you see is Marx, Durkheim, and Weber all the time in a sociology course, right? Classical sociology or social theory. At the same time, in the discipline, there was a big debate about who the first sociologist was, right? And so you had a great book called The Scholar Denied, written by Alden Morris. And in the book, he makes this case, right? He looks at the history of Du Bois in and of himself and really kind of situates this person as the first sociologist. And so, you know, ironically thinking, or maybe like naively thinking, that this would be the foundation for which the discipline itself would come to terms with its own kind of history and racialization or racism and the kind of promotion of it. Nothing really was done. Some people talked about it. I've been on panels and senior faculty was like, I don't even know where to start with the work, right? And so it's a lot of ways in which the same type of mantra, the same type of rhetoric, the same type of narratives get reproduced, even if the truth, quote unquote, is really out there. And so we find ourselves today in a similar type of situation, right? To even be an immigrant, it's not an identity status, it's a political category. And so when we start to think about racialization processes as a way to think about political characterization, I think it really fundamentally changes how we think about our relationship with the state in and of itself, right? The other thing I want to think about in terms of the work I've been doing is like, if we know so much about urban neighborhoods, we know so much about Black communities, why do we see a lot of disadvantages or undeveloped places, as some of my colleagues on this panel have discussed and researched? Why are they still in similar states so many years later, right? And to me, I'm very critical at most conferences about the policy solutions that we call these things, right? In my training, a lot of it was based on, you know, if a neighborhood is bad, you got to move them somewhere. And Henry brought this up earlier in a meeting about this idea of migration. And it was always this kind of proximity to whiteness that was always deemed as the best quintessential way to kind of get Black people out of poverty, to get them upwardly mobile. And I just fundamentally reject that, right? You know, in a lot of different spaces, because it wasn't white people around me that got me into the space today. And the ways when we think about this kind of historical moment, I just want us to kind of remind ourselves, like, what are we trying to do here today? And so I'm actually reading this book, Abundance. Everybody's probably heard of this book. It's a big book on housing supply. And even in this book, you know, they stress this idea that we need to get out of our way. But even in this, I think we forget a lot about what's happening in this constant rush to do something. And so for all of us, I would like us to just take a minute and sit, right? To kind of take stock of where we're at, to kind of take full stock of where other people have been and how we can think about this a little bit differently. And I think one of the ways in which kind of wrestling with theory, I think about this is the idea of like liberalism, or what it means to be a liberal. I wrote about this earlier today. I said, liberal inclusion treats oppression as mainly a problem of exclusion from rights, institutions, and opportunity. But Black unfreedom has always been produced by the normal operation of US economic and state systems. Slavery as a wealth-building labor regime, Jim Crow as a racial political economy, and the post-civil rights era as a blend of austerity, policing, segregation, and labor market stratification. If the underlying rules that distribute safety, housing, health, and wealth remain intact, inclusion often just changes who gets addressed to a harmful or unequal system, not the system itself. Inclusion is necessary, but not sufficient. If the US remains organized around racialized extraction, disposability, and coercive governance, integration can coexist with ongoing Black unfreedom. Liberation as a durable condition for the many implies transforming the society that produces racial hierarchy in the first place, right? And so 5 years ago, I find myself in Canada thinking about it's going to be this progressive liberal bubble that we can find some beauty in. And the story is very similar. There's a lot of similarities in terms of how we think about Black people in Canada versus how we think about Black Americans here and across overseas. There is this kind of mutation, right? So the US is this kind of quintessential case category that a lot of people use, is that, you know, we're not as bad as the US in our kind of history. And it kind of resolves them from all the damage they have done, right? So you have Black disadvantage, Black displacement going on in Canada. You have a lot of silencing it because they won't even talk about race in an authentic way, right? They can't get past the identity markers in and of itself. And so for me, it's to kind of complicate this history, right? This transnational history of where we come and where we find ourselves, not to think about the grass is green over there and what we can do at home. And I find that in the ways I go home for Christmas, or the ways I just go see friends and family, any chance I get throughout the year. And so if anything, Black History Month for me is the return to what it really means to be a politic in and of ourselves, to be in mutual aid and support of one another, and to constantly change our thinking about this as an individual kind of idea or space that we actually can function in. The last thing I'll leave us with today before we kind of get into a broader discussion is the question I constantly ask myself is, what would it mean to die a glorious death? What would it mean to live in a full purpose way to where you can actually support one another? What would it mean to love somebody? Not just love like I like you and you're cool, but radical love, where I'll do anything for you, even if I don't feel like it. And so, if anything, I would hope that Black History Month is a reminder of like radical love, not one that's just based on individuals, based on a particular identity, but a politics of care, mutual aid, cooperation, and support that we all strive to do. Thank you.
Hello, hello. All right, I'm gonna be reading off of my notes for my 5 minutes. In grappling with the topic of reimagining Black futures, I'm confronted with the stumbling blocks that impede our sovereignty. Sovereignty over our food, our housing, employment, health, safety, and ultimately our freedom. I am not sure if it pains me more that these stumbling blocks were already outlined in Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail in 1963 and have only grown into a Leviathan rearing its ugly head in different forms, or that those ugly heads are sometimes a reflection of ourselves, at least in color and in hue. In this letter, Dr. King talks about a negative piece versus a positive piece, where he states, the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you on the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically feels he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time and who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. Sound familiar? But I would like to amend this statement. Today, we are not just talking about the white liberal and the Negro. Neoliberalism has transformed itself into that multi-headed monster that I spoke of, to be adopted by anyone, just as white supremacy has evolved into an ideological framework that has been adopted by various racial and ethnic groups to suppress the global working class. Neoliberalism is its accomplice. It is, in fact, an instrument of oppression, decorated as something that is supposed to help marginalized people. It might show up as the Black mayor or Black police chief of a corrupt operation, or a white intellectual in the academy who positions themselves as an ally. It is the perversion of so-called multiculturalism, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and anti-racism that positions itself in the middle of empire. It's the institution's counter-revolutionary behavior that uses these tactics as instruments of oppression, that is more willing to use Black and brown bodies to reproduce their dominant narratives or quell resistance. The Egyptian-Canadian author Omar El-Akkad speaks about the middle of empire in reference to the genocide in Gaza, where he states, beyond the high walls and barbed wire and checkpoints that pin this place, there is the empire. And the empire, as well, is cocooned inside its own fortress of language, a language through the prism of which buildings are never destroyed, but rather spontaneously combust, in which blasts come and go like Chinooks over the mountain, and people are killed as though to be killed is the only natural and rightful ordering of their existence, as though living was the aberration. And this language might protect the empire's most bloodthirsty fringe, but the fringe has no use for linguistic malpractice. It is instead the middle, the liberal, well-meaning, easily upset middle that desperately needs the protection this kind of language provides. Because it is the middle of empire that must look upon itself and say, yes, this is tragic, but necessary, because the alternative is barbarism. The alternative to countless killed and maimed and orphaned and left without home, without school, without hospital, and the screaming from under the rubble and corpses disposed of by vultures and dogs, and the days-old babies left to scream and starve, is barbarism. Sound familiar? So how do I reimagine Black futures? I imagine a shaking off of this impediment on sovereignty, and for Black people to define, control, and govern their own food, land, and safety, to forego the so-called allyships that redirect radical Black insurgencies back into a well-controlled container. because it is these very containers in which Black people were transported in when they were kidnapped and brought to this continent. And it is these containers that are commodities designed to imprison Black people. And it is these containers that are used to ship out our immigrant brothers and sisters. Both metaphorically and physically, these containers attempt to sanitize and deculturate all people of color, to strip them of their identity and belonging. And so it is imperative that our imagination brings about a collective of Black people, immigrants of color, and the global working class to dismantle the Middle Empire, because to decapitate the Leviathan is only temporary. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here at our second annual Black History Month celebration. And I say that in great pride because we drew a line in the sand and said that a school of planning cannot call itself an authentic school of planning and ignore Black History Month. And so I salute our leader for making all of this happen. Today, about 100 years ago, Carter G. Woodson launches Negro History Week back in 1926. There were three critical things that we can think of as we reflect on that moment and the thinkings of Woodson. Woodson knew that racial capitalism, out of necessity, had to distort Black history and erase it. He knew that this system required that Black people did not understand their positionality in society and the powerful socioeconomic forces that kept them there. So he imagined Black history as a way that we look back at our past to understand how we got to this moment. And based on our understanding of the challenges that we're facing at a given time, to use this history, this knowledge, this understanding as a guide in the battle and the fight for freedom. History is a weapon. Nothing to be put in a book, set on a shelf. Not stories to tell at a conference. A weapon that allows us first and foremost to understand who we are. To understand our positionality in society and why that positionality exists and who profits from that positionality. And to use that knowledge, that insight, and that understanding as a guide in our battle and our fight for freedom. And Woodson wanted folks to know back in 1926, first and foremost, you are not free. And the burning question was, how do we get free and liberated? Because Woodson knew that freedom is one thing and liberation is something else. They're not synonyms. So based on this insight, we understand that Authoritarianism is the greatest danger that Black people has faced since the age of Jim Crow. This authoritarianism is not some storm passing over. It's not some storm passing over, which means you can hide in the basement and wait till that storm is over. This is not happening. We are facing the greatest danger since the age of Jim Crow. So to reimagine Black futures in the age of authoritarianism is to declare that in this moment, Black people will not back down. In this moment defined by intimidation, coercion, the normalization of state violence and surveillance, Black people will not back down. As democratic institutions, and we see them erode as dissent, as Minneapolis shows us, is being criminalized. And power is increasingly consolidated in the hands of a few people and their political allies. Reimagining Black futures in a time of authoritarianism says Black people will not back down. And that in this moment, it becomes increasingly important to hold fast to the freedom dreams and to dare to envision and fight for another very different but possible world. One in which white supremacy, empire, racial capitalism, limited democracy, and unchecked authority can be found only as artifacts in the History Museum. So, in these moments, this is where we turn to Black history as a beacon of hope. I say a beacon of hope because when we look at Black history, we see that in the Black struggle for freedom, we are undefeated. We fought against slavery and defeated it. We fought against Jim Crow racism and defeated it. And we were struggling against the evils of neoliberal capitalism, a new brand of racialized capitalism, and that fight was still going on. But now we face racist authoritarianism. And so our history will give us the insights in how to fight this enemy, the strategies, the tactics we need in order to defeat it. It allows us to remember that the Black movement is a long struggle. It started from the moment that Black people were enslaved and placed on that ship. And it continues unfinished to this very moment. So in this time, as we understand this, we reimagine our relationships with others and understand our friends and our enemies. And most importantly, we know that in this particular moment of time, that we must fight against the deportation and intimidation of immigrants of color, because they are a critical part of this team that is in place to defeat racist capitalism, authoritarianism, and all of the other particular forces. Although there are many more words on these notes that I think I referred to, I better stop because they told us that we did not have 8 hours in the program. So I'm stopping right now.
Yes. I'm glad that we gave you and all of our panelists a round of applause, because these opening statements were quite powerful, and we appreciate them. I heard that we can't just think of the community in the sense of, oh, from the bottom up, that really it's omnipresent knowledge that our community provides. I also was moved when I heard radical love and the importance of radical love in everything that we do. Whether we want to do it or not, let's make it radical and call it radical love. But also be leery of neoliberalism and how it is an instrument of oppression, a piece that we sometimes put on the back burner. With that in mind, though, our history tells us who we are. Our history is our weapon, and it can be used in an appropriate way. We hear that loud and clear. So I want to start out with this first question, and this is a question for all of the panelists. And of course, we'll be mindful of time, so I ask that each panelist be as concise as possible. Fingers crossed, right? Nonetheless, let's get started. Black people have always confronted the forces of white supremacy and racial injustice in the United States. This question has interrelated parts. First, how does this emerging system of racist authoritarianism differ from earlier US systems of white supremacy, both prior to World War II and during the post-war era dominated by neoliberal capitalism? And what new or intensified dangers does this emerging system of racist authoritarianism pose for Black people? That's a lot, but I know you can handle it. So who would like to start? Yes, Dr. Dancer?
I wasn't saying I was going to start, but we'll start.
Okay.
You looked at and I'm gonna start, look.
I think it's a few things, right? And so a colleague of mine, Jason Hackworth, and I wrote a paper last year looking at this power rhetoric. And part of it, we were kind of following the Boysian tradition where you were about the propaganda of history years ago, right? And this idea that historians in themselves were kind of manufacturing false kind of reconstructions of what really happened. And so we use that same kind of approach to talk about conservative economics, right? And the idea that a lot of the ways in which you see kind of policy making in and of itself rest around falsehoods about what really happened. And so we looked at a few different areas that we thought this plays out a lot. One is that the system is just racially unfair, right? And so this is a rhetoric, or the system is racially fair. The system of rhetoric and about how people operate through different systems, whether it's education, home ownership or housing, wealth accumulation, criminal justice, whatever. But when you actually look at data across these spaces, you find a lot more nuanced stories about what happened. And I've known this in terms of, let's just take the space of education. I've known this since I was an undergrad, that, you know, Black and Latino men had some of the lowest graduation rates out of any other group. On the flip side, Black women had the highest graduation rates for a long time, right? And so what is that telling us there? Is there a gender story going there, or is there something else pervasive in how we think about it? But the narrative itself tends to be that Black kids are not doing good in school. The same thing in home ownership, right? Home ownership for Black and Latino and other groups have lagged under white and Asian households. But the same type of wealth creation that happens doesn't permeate into those household units in and of itself. And so I have some great colleagues, Elizabeth Cora Glenn, Junior Howell, they've been doing a lot of work on appraisers, looking at the kind of stripping down of Black wealth through the underinvestment or undervaluation of houses. I could tell you a story in and of myself. I've been a landlord since 2009, not by choice, by circumstance. My dad had a subprime mortgage back during the Great Recession, and part of me helping him out and getting into the housing space was to deal with that. Last year, last year, we tried to get a housing appraisal on a house in Philly. The house appraised at $180,000. The funny part about it is the house had appraised at $230,000 a year before that, right? And so $50,000 of wealth that the appraiser said we just did not have. Fast forward, we had to get a reappraiser, do a whole new reassessment. We didn't change anything about the house at all. And the house again appraised for almost $230,000, right? And so to me is that if these anecdotal stories are so widespread, it creates these systematic kind of undervaluing of people in these places. And so I think before, if we think about this kind of pre-World War II era, a lot of these rules that we had, Jim Crow laws, Black codes, they were way more overt. And today, a lot of the ways in which racialization, particularly in terms of capital, becomes more covert, right? And so the undervaluation of Black homes becomes a normalized understanding. It has to be real, right? Because you see all this kind of disadvantage around. And I think part of what we're starting to see today is a lot of similarities in terms of what's happening. And so today, we can think about the over-surveillance, the militarization of policing, voter suppression, legal repression. On the flip side, I think we see a lot more disinformation, a lot more social media mobilization that we didn't. The speed of that in which has happened, and just conspiracy politics, right? 2020 election is a fraud. The other ways when we see is that the economic precarity combined with the impression. So unlike neoliberalism alone, I think economic exclusion is now paired with open coercion rather than managed inequality, right? Segregated communities, you had your lower income communities, but you were over there. Now there's this kind of understanding that these things are even being paired together, so it doesn't have to be so segregated. It follows you wherever you are. The last thing I'll say is that there's a normalization of this kind of racialized authoritative rhetoric. And so open hostility towards Black people, right? The end of woke era. Hostility towards migrants and multiracial democracies, right? Even Trump saying that these other countries are failing, right? Or going in a toilet or shithole countries. And an increasing emboldening both state and non-state violence, right? And so the idea that you can ramp up ICE, but the idea that you could also just let everybody go from January 6th. Is the idea that the state itself is operating in these kind of nuanced forms. It's not strictly illegal to do certain things. It combines the illegality with the legality in the same type of ways. And I think that's some of the most pervasive ways in which this kind of understanding of authoritarian rule has to be kind of decoupled, right? Think about what are the legal ramifications, but what are the kind of normal socialized practices that we all do that reproduces these same type of notions and narratives. And so to me, I see that tension with the kind of growing space of just social media presence, right? Widespread. And we see this in the recent deaths in Minneapolis and the Black Lives Movement that continues to ongoing with the Say Her Name campaign and ongoing force. And so yeah, to me, that's some of the differences.
Thank you, Dr. Dancer, for getting us started. Now, let's hear from you, Dr. Bates.
Well, in part because you just were speaking about social media. I mean, I'm always hesitant to sort of describe the period that we're in as being worse than any other previous periods. I don't want to make that an implication, but I'll say something that I really noticed in a very on the ground way that's kind of complicated now in this organizing and social movement space. So pre-COVID pandemic, there was already kind of a push toward idea of digital organizing and using more online platforms and tools. But then 2020, because of the need to be distanced and separated, that really exploded. So yes, people were in the street marching, but like sort of the election, a lot of the campaign, a lot of the advocacy work was happening through online and through digital platforms, all of which are controlled and algorithmized by billionaires, by bazillionaires who are part of, like, as it turns out, a network of, authoritarian, white supremacist, misogynist behavior, right? They're very engaged in the right-wing project. And so that's a challenge, right? So now you have this kind of whole set of folks who came into organizing in this moment of doing things through online and through social media, who haven't been socialized or trained or sort of brought up in movement spaces that are face-to-face just by the virtue of being virtual for a while. and are missing those networks and skills, and we have some disintegration and kind of disconnection in communities, simultaneously to a long project of removing the content of Black history and other civil rights histories from our education space. So it's like when you say, okay, the Birmingham bus boycott, it's like vaguely rings a bell, but what really was going on there? Not sure about that. And I see that, with students, for example, at Portland State who just they kind of know things. They saw a TikTok video, but they don't really know that much about it. So I think it's like a really challenging time right now to feel like, particularly through our media environment and the social media environment, like these are totalizing forces that could not possibly be resisted. We also see these, amazing things happening in Minneapolis, for example, but it's kind of like, what am I seeing? How are they doing it? And how they're doing it is through more traditional contact, person to person contact. So like we're coming to it, right? It's coming back to us. We're thinking about the ideas, but those infrastructures, those ecosystems kind of aren't quite there. And there's a lot of anxiety, I would say now, at least in the organizing spaces that I are about, like, how do you do communications? How do you, like, we don't want to post a thing on Instagram because Mark Zuckerberg, or how do we break through the algorithm? Oh, wait, we have to make flyers and put them up. Like, we're gonna, like, where are the people at? We're gonna bring them a zine, so it's like, we're kind of having to relearn things in a moment of emergency. And I think one of the things that we would do well, I mentioned the Birmingham bus boycott. I just saw a comment recently from folks in Minnesota saying, like, we got to look at that, because that was over a year of grinding, of logistics, of stick-to-itiveness. Like, that wasn't the Birmingham bus boycott was not 2 weeks and done. And that is like hard sometimes for us to wrap our minds around the commitment that people made to the upheaval of their everyday life, and the resistance and the violence that they faced because they were boycotting the bus system. And to like think about us having to do that again now, and to like really grapple with that stuff and then really build those networks out. I think we are in a little bit of a challenging space for that, right? I don't think it's not possible, but we have to be intentional about how we evolve like tactics and strategies and communications for the moment that we're in.
Also telling the history, telling the story again, so that the current generation understands in a more explicit way, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's like teaching in Black studies right now for college students, students are like maybe 18 to 25, it's like they don't remember the 90s because they weren't there. So, it's like constantly having to remember that this is actually quite a while ago. And not only was it a long time ago, so you can access these things, but also the histories have been propagandized, sanitized, not taught. No Child Left Behind did not add, a standardized test on understanding, the complications of putting together the March on Washington, which is an event, let alone the complications of putting, being in a siege for years to fight Jim Crow. And family histories are often not shared in that way. Or, again, if you're 20, like, do you even have living memory in your family to ask, hey, what was going on, or what was that like? We don't know. The very deliberate destruction of many organizations, the loss of archives. It's really challenging to learn that stuff. And so we're sort of like learning it, reinventing it, inventing it for a new era and a new generation while under a pretty serious emergency level threat. Spiking in certain localities. I think it's pretty hard.
Yeah.
It's pretty hard.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Dr. Williams.
I don't have too much to add. This question was answered very flawlessly here. But I guess if I tried to take a little piece of the first part of your question, which is how it's different, I guess I'm not that old, but I would say as a student of history, it very much seems the same. things are more insidious now than they were before. And I guess if I really had to hone in on one thing, it would be, as Prentice said here, normalization and racialization. And unfortunately, this normalization and racialization being done and out of the mouthpiece of individuals from the communities that they oppress. And that's sort of unheard of to a degree. When I see ICE agents that are of Hispanic descent or South American descent, locking up and snatching kids from their brothers and sisters, or African Americans doing the same thing, I think maybe that's slightly different. But how do we get there? And I think it's a normalization. You guys were in Buffalo. How many people here, by a show of hands, have heard of the Kia Boys? A couple of people, right? So it's a group of kids. Sometimes they're called YNs that that are taking Kias, right? So what do we do about that? Well, we increase surveillance, right? We get Ring doorbells. We allow those doorbells to be readily communicated with the police state. But what are they going to do with that information? Do they really care about our Kia? Do they really care about the kids running up in our driveway, pulling our doors? Or are they using it to separate individuals from their families? So I'm only going to touch on a little bit of that first question. I'm not going to attempt to answer the rest of it now, but I will talk a little bit later about how these technologies reproduce those dominant narratives that I talked about earlier, and how it's a little bit easier now for individuals through fear mongering and racialization and normalization for them to sign on to that. So that's all I'll add for now.
All right, we'll be circling back to you for sure. All right, Dr. Taylor.
Yeah. We have to be very clear about what we face if we're going to defeat it. So it's a tricky question between what's going on right now and what has happened in the past. And it makes it even trickier because so much of what happens in our society is hidden. In the earlier periods, particularly before World War II, liberal democracy was a duality. That consisted both of liberal democratic institutions on one side and a highly repressive, violent system of labor control and management of oppressed nationalities, Blacks, indigenous population. There was liberal democracy for whites, but this radical system of control for others, managed through various forms of informal terrorism, lynchings, murders. One of my great uncles was shot and killed in Memphis because his girlfriend, a white man says, was his mistress. And he just shot him and said, "This nigga tried to steal from me." Police said, "Oh, okay, it's all right." That was the forms of violent social control. So the duality existed. In post-World War II era, the duality became more covert the same radical, violent system of control was there. They called it the counterintelligence program of the federal government, COINTELPRO. And for those of you who do not know about COINTELPRO, Google it and find out. But it was the system that they used to disrupt organizations and groups, to kill and assassinate people like Fred Hampton in Chicago. Liberal democracy coupled with a violent, racialized system of management. There's a lot of literature on that, and you can start by trying to read about South Africa, which was a representative democracy, it was a liberal democracy. And apartheid was its system of management. We talk about England and all of Europe. They had liberal democracy at home and violent repressive systems of controlling other people. So we have to understand that. We also have to understand that even in the United States was founded as a colony. Do you understand what a colony is? A colony is established, a settler colony is established to exploit and oppress the folks in that native land and to take the resources and send them back. So when they declared independence, they didn't declare independence from oppression and exploitation. They declared independence from taking the wealth that they were extracting and sending it back. It's sort of like a mafia example, where you belong to the mafia. Say England is the mafia. And you got criminal gangs all over the world. And then one of the criminal gangs says, I don't want to give my loot back. I'm breaking off from the mafia. I'm using that example so you can understand a very complicated history. I'm talking to the people watching that aren't nice. This is really a good story. So what authoritarianism differs because now a system is emerging where liberal democracy is discarded for everybody. Power is consolidated. Oppression and exploitation covers the entire population. Although it will be much, much more intense among people of color. So in this country, they know that the forces that have been driving liberal democracy and expanding liberal democracy is what we call the progressive axis. Blacks, indigenous people, immigrants of color, and progressive whites. Trump knows that in order to defeat liberal democracy, you must destroy the axis. So the step is to go back to the Immigration Act of 1924 that literally eliminated immigration from Africa, Asia, and the Americas. That's the game plan. Then you disenfranchise blacks and you keep the moderate whites under control and you return to your historical roots. And that's authoritarianism. It infects everyone. And that is why they are killing white people in Minneapolis. So that's the difference. It's a new system that will be oppressive of everyone versus another system. The bad news for Black folks is that if this system triumphs, the goal is to take Black people back to the 1890s, etc., where any semblance of rights gets crushed and where levels of exploitation are greatly intensified. So I think that's the difference betwixt and between these two systems, and why the fight against this system requires the development of a much more, a broader umbrella of people that we want to bring in the fold to fight against authoritarianism.
But it was this normalization of the kind of violent, racialized system of management that was pervasive.
Yes, but at a whole new level now, because what was being normalized is the military presence in these cities. What is being normalized with ICE is the emergence of a new type of Gestapo. I mean, ICE now, they don't even need a warrant to kick in your door. And if that gets normalized and accepted, and when they are no longer pretending to be after immigrants, it means that you've got hooded police running around and you can just disappear. You know, and that's the kind of thing that we saw. We saw the first step with this was when Trump put National Guards in DC and other places, test case. So Minneapolis is a major test case to see whether or not this kind of system can be operationalized and people can get used to it.
A major test case for the world to see.
Yeah.
The entire world to see. With that in mind and moving on to a few other questions, across 4 centuries, Black people have defeated slaveocracy, overthrown Jim Crow, and advanced democracy through mass movements. Drawing on your work and experience, how should kind of this imagining of Black freedom be used to guide our current struggle against racial or racist authoritarianism? Henry, why don't you take it now? Because we know we're going to hear from you, and then we'll move on.
I think, as I was saying before, the most critical things are building the alliance.
Right.
Building the alliance. I think that's at the very top of the list. Most critical challenges now are stopping the work of ICE and the deportation and the terrorism that immigrants are under at this particular period of time. The other thing is to develop a deeper understanding of what's happening in the country. Right now, all across many of the places in the South, particularly places like Texas, outside of the South, Ohio, Indiana, universities are under siege, where in many of these schools they have these, you have to publish the syllabi. You cannot talk about anything that are divisive. They have student spies in the classroom, and they've changed the rules of tenure so that even if you're a tenured professor and you're teaching things that they call controversial, then you can be put in jail or lose your job.
Even the panel of this.
Yeah, I mean, my class in race, class, and gender, that would be illegal.
Yeah.
They'd be knocking on the door. You must go, Professor Taylor. And so those are the types of things that we have to fight against. The war is different now.
Right.
Because simultaneously as rights are being removed, important institutions are being attacked. And so I think that we have to develop strategies now that are reflective of that. And the thing that we've learned from the past is that we build these coalitions and then we form these strategies down on the ground. And the last thing I want to say in relationship to this, at the same time, we have to build models that speak to the type of world we want to create.
Mm-hmm.
That the one thing that we know that we cannot defeat authoritarianism and then go back to neoliberalism. Mm-hmm. We don't want to do that. We want to go on to something else that is better and different, however you want to choose to define it. We don't want to go back.
Dr. Bates, what about you?
I mean, I think that's so important. I think there's like this temptation to sort of do, like, we just need to go back one step to the thing we had right before we had this because it's comfortable. But that thing was obviously very fragile. If that were robust, then we wouldn't have fallen down here. So there's a third thing we gotta go to. The thing when I think about this question of how do we do freedom dreams, I was really thinking about sort of principles that we have to hold on to when we're doing those practices. So I work really closely for a long time with an organization in Portland called Imagine Black, which is founded exactly around this idea of doing radical imagination futures work. We did a people's plan for Black Portland probably about 10 years ago. We're talking about, doing it again, evolving some of the ideas, talking about abolition. But I'm not talking about the moment that we're in, of course. And I think one of the principles that we've tried to really hold on to is the idea that Blackness means proliferating kinship. So I mentioned like Blackness itself is kind of like is an invention of enslavement, right? Like that's a category created by the breaking of kinship, by the destruction of the kinds of like familial and cultural, ethnic, tribal, if you will, groupings that you would have in Africa in coming here and turning into Black. The breaking up of families, right? These horrible things that were happening during enslavement, the sexual violence that resulted in mixed race people who also get classified as Black under one drop rule. But that the sort of resilient piece of that is proliferating kinship. This is kin. Everyone is kin. And so with Imagine Black, we're really trying to hold on to that, one, within Black community in Portland, which is very diverse, right? Portland actually has a quite similar demographic to Minneapolis. So we're watching Minneapolis very carefully. We have a lot of East African folks who make up a large portion of our Black community. Many of them are Muslim. So we have a solidarity practice around Palestine and Free Palestine. We have people who are immigrant identified. They're immigrants or they're U.S. born children of immigrants. So obviously solidarities with immigrants. And like, as we start to have these Venn diagrams, then sort of blur the lines of those circles, right? The circle gets bigger and bigger. Folks who are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated, right? Because that is obviously racially disproportionate, out the wazoo. Even in a 2% Black state like Oregon, our state penitentiaries are shockingly disproportionately Black and also Latino, right? So we start to proliferate there. Our unhoused population, our unhoused neighbors, heavily stigmatized, heavily dehumanized in our communities, but they must be part of our kinship network. Any person who's gender nonconforming, because we know Black people are always considered gender nonconforming. So whether we must be in kin with trans and queer folks because we're white, and some of it is because we're all subject to these suspicions. We're all subject to that surveillance eye as Black people. But like once you start to say, "Hey, we're all in it," then man, we're all in it. And we can really start to access the possibilities and the dreaming and the imagination of every possible part of our community. If we can get really clear about our solidarities, and really clear about our allegiances and what we must do. Because now every person I named has to be safe and free. Okay, well, how are we going to do that? If all these people that I named who are stigmatized, marginalized, dehumanized have to be safe and free, then, we have a lot of work to do. But like we can hold to that practice and hold to that principle always as we're doing this work. Then we can start to ask the question so that we're not just saying like utopian fantasy out there on the horizon, but we're really being very specific about what it takes for us to get from here to that thing. What are the real practices that we need to embody in the way that we work together right now, in the process and practice of our community development, how we treat each other, how we work together. And then what are, possibly mapping out these next steps and strategies. So again, we don't just go back to the thing one step before where we are now, which is hell. We can't be on the hell's doormat. We have to be in another neighborhood. We got to start moving to another town. Yeah.
I'm conscious of time. These are such important responses and ones that really portend for us to ask additional questions. I want to make sure that there are questions from the audience that we can hear as well, both our in-person audience and Zoom audience. But before we go to our audience, would like to give Dr. Dantzler and Dr. Williams just opportunity to respond to this question that was just asked, and then we'll move to audience participation.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I've learned over the last few years, and this has come from job faculty searches and everything else, is that methods without theory is just straight madness, right? And so we have a lot of tools at our disposal, but if you don't have an ideological perspective of where you're trying to get to, what are we doing? And so in insane ways, you can end up working against each other, even though you might have a similar goal in that space. I think for me, it's kind of thinking about where we are today. And so partly me going to Canada was one, the job, but also kind of thinking about what they do differently. And so to me, like being in conversation or in connection with Indigenous scholars and Indigenous communities, right? A whole different space where the state has recognized them in different ways, has promised all these resources. And yet when you look across the board, particularly in my space of housing, you see a lot of kind of Indigenous and Black kind of disadvantage, right? And so when you look at shelter systems overflowing with Black and Indigenous people, when you look at homelessness counts, when you look at undervalued housing, if they end up owning property, when you look at over surveillance of particular neighborhoods, even in a colleague of mine, Nimoy Lewis, and other colleagues just did a study in Toronto looking at eviction rates. Even in neighborhoods with Black people at higher incomes, they still see higher levels of eviction rates when the landlord is a financialized landlord. And so there is this kind of targeting of particular communities based on this idea about they're able to actually garner political or social control within that space. And so to me, kind of thinking about how do we work in tandem with that really relates to, are we reproducing the same type of models and practices that got us here into the first place? And so one thing for me and the work I've been trying to do is like, when it comes to housing, we usually only know two ways to live: own and rent, right? And a lot of it, which you look, particularly in Black communities, there's been so many different ways to live with each other that have not been formalized into housing policy practices and policies, right? And so multi-generational households are a common thing. Nana living upstairs, or uncle staying with you, a lot of mobility in and outside that house, right? Translating or transversing that house from generation to generation, even if it doesn't accumulate wealth or equity over time, because it's a safe space for you to always go back to, right? Different social worlds within one kind of neighborhood. And so it wasn't just the house, it was the block that you would play on. It's the community center that you would go to. It was the church that most of you were participating in. If we're in a space of digital or virtual work and we're in a space of like declining religiosity, then it begs the question, how are we getting those faith-based traditions and how people are actually interacting with each other? And so I think we have to go back to a lot of those same institutions that are kind of declining at this point and really rethink what was the problem with them in the first place. And it had nothing to do with the institutions in and of themselves, is how we treated them, right? They didn't fall directly into zoning policies. There were rooming housing ordinances in a lot of different places, right? You can't just get a loan with you and your sister and your brother regularly or as easily as you could if you were an individual or a married couple. And so when we think about this kind of iconography or the image that the kind of system is trying to create, you can think about it in this time of the two-person suburban household, right? Living in a suburban community with their kids and a white picket fence. And that image is just not there anymore. And I don't think that image should have ever been there, right? It was never the goal to have assets or material. The goal was to have agency and self-determination in a lot of different ways. And I do think people kind of conflate these kind of things of material gains with this understanding of having that agency, right? One thing I'll always remember that a colleague of mine said at a conference, Laura Raymond, who's a professor at Georgia Tech, she made this comment, this quote that says, "Inclusion into empire is not freedom." Right. And so if you're constantly just spreading out the resources to people that have the same advantages that white people have, I don't think that's getting us to the place of freedom or liberation in that same way. And so could you actually respect the models, the practices, the tools that other communities have been using for generations and use that as a way to create spaces for them to do the things that they want to do? And so relying on those kind of ideological practices that are fundamentally based on collectivism, I think is the way for which we have to kind of recall and remind ourselves is the idea to get to this understanding of kinship more broadly. Absolutely.
And so I'll end it with just trying to tie a few things together that the other panelists talked about. In some ways, I do a lot of like health equity kind of talks and things like that. And we make this thing really complicated and we talk about social determinants of health and various things like that. But I remember I was asked to speak at something last year and my answer to almost every question was just very simple. And that simplicity is around, like more socialized programming around food and housing and security. And I want to sort of break this apart a little bit because I didn't give much of a response last time, but I think this really falls into it. So first, I have to acknowledge that there have been organizers on the ground for a long time. There have been Black studies scholars for a little less time, but that have taken what Dr. Bates said, this sort of vantage point and created this academic home. And somehow their movements are infiltrated with the same neoliberal rhetoric. And I feel almost offended by it. Dr. Taylor talked earlier about COINTELPRO. We had socialized medicine and socialized housing under the Black Panthers. That worked. Why didn't it work? Why didn't it sustain? They literally blew it up. Black Lives Matter movement. Maybe it wasn't blown up by COINTELPRO or, the alphabet state, but it was blown up in a different way. It might have been slightly. But for me, it was mainly dismantled by institutions like this, creating diversity offices and inclusive offices, not focus on changing the material conditions of Black people that organizers and Black studies scholars have been focused on for many years. In fact, it detracted from those movements. And going back to this sort of socialized approach, we're sort of fed the same stories over and over again. Socialism doesn't work. We go dismantle a country like Cuba or strangle its economic resources and we say, oh, look, it doesn't work. In South America, in the Middle East. And then we normalize this conversation around capitalism. Well, I mean, look at us. Capitalism must work because look how it's being sustained. I hear the same language being used around AI right now. We can't stop AI. AI is going to happen regardless. And so we just have to get on board with it. While they build these multi-trillion-dollar now data centers and extract wealth and resources and money from our communities, only to then use those technology to suppress us and surveil us. So I don't want to normalize those conversations anymore. I want to go back to the basics and back to the major focus that we should all be thinking about. Are the material conditions of Black people changing, yes or no? And if not, who's in the way of that? And Dr. Taylor said earlier, we can't defeat racist authoritarianism today and go back to neoliberalism. One thing I might disagree with Dr. Taylor is that we can't defeat authoritarianism unless we defeat neoliberalism. And so that's where my main focus is, and that's where my position is. And so I'll end it on that. Thank you.
We're going to mark that we have agreement here, so that's good. That's very good. It's very good. If we do have questions, please make your way to the microphone in the room, and if there are questions online, we can take that at this time. All right. As we begin to take audience questions, I have another question. Oh, you have? Let's come on down. Right, right.
Okay. All right. So first of all, thank you. I enjoyed the panel.
And if you can just talk right into the mic.
Yeah. Hold on a second, because I got a ton of notes in here, and I don't have my readers. Ah. Okay. What are your thoughts on the mobilization of the youth and the impact of the criminalization of hip hop culture on the role youth could play in challenging this authoritarian system?
Dr. Dancer, did you want to take that? And we'll be as concise as possible with our responses so that we can get to as many questions. But I also understand I'm on your time.
No problem. So thank you for the question. So a great scholar of mine, I don't work with youth. It's an ethical reason because I don't want to deal with ethics boards and trying to do research with youth. But partly what I have learned, right, is with a great colleague and friend of mine, Asia Reynolds at Wayne State, is that youth are usually the markers of resistance, but also first responses to some of these harms, right? And a lot of her work is on Black girlhood, right? And so partly what we need to understand is youth function in very fugitive spaces, as she calls them, right? They don't have the same type of control or surveillance, and their surveillance tends to be a little bit different, right? Not just parentals and adults, but also policing in of itself, right? A misgendering of particular youth, thinking they're older than they actually are. And this gets translated into a lot of the practices, even the scholarship that we talk about, right? And so I was watching a commentary earlier, and they call Emmett Till a young man, and I was like, he was a 14-year-old boy, right? And so the ways in which youth get the adultification of youth becomes very problematic in how we think about it. The other thing is that there are a lot of youth just going missing across the country, and nobody's talking about it, right? And it's not just in cities like Atlanta. We have the issues in Toronto. Black boys are going missing up there, and it's not a lot of conversation on it. And so youth, because of their lack of power in a lot of different ways, they're tend to not get the same type of visibility when some of these things come up. The second question is interesting and like deeply problematic in so many ways, and thinking about how the criminalization of hip hop, right? Like even in that space too. I've been thinking about this a lot with like Nicki Minaj and all this type of stuff going on, everybody trying to kiss the ring in a lot of ways. And so we can't think about capital as the ultimate way to save us. Right. And I think this is the part of the piece where I've been talking to people about kind of even questions about reparations is like, well, give us some money. And I'm like, that's not really going to solve the material conditions of all of us. It might not even solve the material conditions of one person because the tax code will change and all that money goes away. And so for me, it's thinking about how do we use kind of music, right, or hip hop as not just like a tool to reach people, but also messaging. I think that's some of the thinking about kind of how we thought about social media. I think music is one of the ways that we could still do messaging, right? Protest music, right? Thinking about all the ways in which music has served as a cultural form, but also as a political action. And so if anything, I would like to see more music artists, right? Even when they take the stands at award shows, but also through their music, kind of promoting more kind of protest style narratives and messages out there.
Let me say a couple of things about that. One is I think it's hugely important and significant that we organize and work with our youth. I mean, I think that's a major part of really building a strong movement. And so building and developing programs and activities with our young people becomes just hugely important and hugely significant. And that's one of the reasons our center works with one of the K through 8th grade programs in the city as a way of developing that. The second thing is you jump, Will, too quick to the criminalization of hip hop. What happened is hip hop emerged as revolutionary music. It emerged as revolutionary movement. And there was a battle fought to move it away from its soul, what we call elite capture, where they took that music and they moved it away and they commercialized it, which is another way of saying they took away the kind of messaging. And then they stole hip hop style, commodified it, and made resources and so forth. So we have to battle to maintain control over our cultural forms and keep them from being captured and moved into avenues that destroy us. So for me, one of the most just painful things is to see all these hip hop artists lose sight of everything. Now, and I say that because I'm writing a book about this woman, Nahanda Isoke Abiodun, who was the godmother of hip hop music in Cuba. And in those, some of the conversations that she had and the young artists talked about, and one of the most powerful groups, Obsession, said that for our music to be authentic, we must stay connected to the people, that we must work with the people, and that we must maintain who and what we are as a way of preserving the authenticity of our music. And that was the driving force that they were fighting for. And the driving force that she was fighting for as they were building a bridge between Cuban hip hop music and US hip hop music. But these elites will battle and fight to keep our kids and our music from serving our social ends, and will turn them into commodities simply to make money. And so that battle to keep our culture speaking to our people as it is intended and to keep our artists connected. I mean, Snoop Dogg ain't connected to nothing but corruption. And we can't allow that to happen. And that's a part of our struggle going forward. So thank you for your question, brother.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. We're going to move to the next question and then get to as many as possible given our time left. Please proceed.
So my question is, what are your thoughts on the current social atmosphere around the existence of racism? A lot of people say that it doesn't exist because a lot of like open violence against people of color aren't like being shown, but I feel like the microaggressions really speak loudly.
Absolutely. Thank you for your question. Dr. Bates, would you like to take that?
I mean, yes, racism still exists. I feel your question because I live in Portland, Oregon, which is a place which does not have a lot of open, violent expressions of racism in 2026. But I think what has been really powerful is to learn and understand. I mean, we talk about hidden histories of Black people. There's also hidden histories of white racism and violence in our country. Oregon has a very deep and long history of racial violence. It was a Klan state. The state actually banned Black people from living in it. When it entered the Union, there was neo-Nazi violent gangs in the streets in the 80s and 90s. And now they just are in like training camps in Eastern Oregon. But I think this is like a really classic challenge of talking about Black history. This could be a conversation between me and my dad. Is it 1,000 paper cuts or like one big, chop of the axe? Like what hurts more? And I feel like that's maybe not as useful as saying, hey, look, we're obviously, because we asked the question, are Black material conditions any better? Are Black spiritual conditions, political conditions any better? If the answer is no, then the thing still exists that's oppressing us. It may look different. It looks different in this time. It looks different in different places. It looks and manifests differently depending on your position in lots of other hierarchies of class and gender and color and all kinds of things. And that's let's get more specific about it. Let's get more real about it. It's not a yes or no answer. The answer is yes. And how is it manifesting itself? And what can we do about this manifestation in this moment in time, in this place that we're at?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Bates. We'll move to the next question.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, panelists, for your time and knowledge. With that being said, injustice should not be perceived as a trend or reoccurring pattern, yet it's constant and always has been. And I can now understand why we have access, and please note that I say access. I understand now that why we have access to education, housing, and jobs. But when will it return to being ours? When will it be mine? I want to own, I want to build, I want to heal, I want to educate. I want that radical love. I don't want to fight, I don't want to survive. So my question is, once us scholars understand our history and educate ourselves on how the system works against us, what actually comes next?
That's a quick one. Struggle. Have to fight to get what we want. And so there is no other way than organizing, mobilizing, and battling to create the type of future, that has to be there. Now, fight is a lot more than marching and demonstration. It's projects that we put down on the ground. The thing that we've talked about all evening is the awful nature of housing and the kind of joke of affordable housing, and how we need to rethink these modelings that are not there. So that's part of fighting, building them in the real world, and then opposing the people who are there. But we have to struggle. You're not going to wake up one morning and there it is. We're not going to wake up one morning and all of the elites and people in power say, wow, we've really been bad.
I think she's asking after the fight. I think she's asking what comes after that. What does that future look like?
Well, what I'm saying that on the other side of that battle, the thing that I see are communities that are healthy. I see communities that are thriving. I see, most important, communities where people are joyful, where institutions and social organizations and groups are in place so that every person has a capacity to become the very best that they can be. I see an economy that is driven by a philosophy that places people over profits. That means the first idea is to how do we make life better for people, not how much money we make. I see a space where all of the science, the technology is being used to create a world where we have the very best that this technology has to offer, and the humanity that goes with it. So for me, that's the prize that we're fighting for, and that was what it would look like once we get it.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yes.
Hi. Thank you guys for being here. This was kind of in response to something that Dr. Bates said, but it's an open question. We talked about the perils of social media as a form of organizing an activist space, at least the mainstream one, Instagram, Twitter, due to the algorithms and then influence of conservative billionaires. There's also been a rise of sites like Blue Sky, Black Sky, and then also Signal for creating kind of decentralized spaces and to use those for organizing. I was just wondering if you guys felt optimistic about how those are being used and kind of created, and whether or not you view them differently than other forms of social media for organizing and fighting racial oppression.
Thank you for your question. I'm going to leave that open. Yes, Dr. Williams.
So yeah, my answer is kind of quick because I've actually never had social media in my life, and the only thing that I have is Signal, and it's specifically for organizing and my organizing efforts. I was actually just thinking about this morning. I read an article, I don't remember where it was, BBC, but France is actually moving away from American big technology. It's more for their own capitalist endeavors to create their own big technology as well. But I was thinking, what does a future look like without that? What does a future look like not being forced to use a software communication platform at my job in this university whose number one customer in the last 2 years was a military committing genocide in the Middle East. So I think about those things from how do we get rid of that? How do we sort of create these systems? I mean, I don't use a lot of the social media, but how do we create all these systems that are more centralized? So yeah, and to your question, I've used Signal and I think it's been pretty good. I know there's what's that one called? Up something? No, there's something up scroll. Yeah, up scroll, and there's various things like that. So I think I appreciate those smart people, whoever they are, behind the systems creating them.
We cannot throw out the technology like baby with the bathwater for sure. So yeah, get a Signal. Don't add people to it that you don't know. That's how you keep it secure. But I also, I think about like, so the Catholic Church sex abuse scandal is not like really a right word, but like part of how that became exposed was because of the increase of the internet, because people actually could communicate across time and distance anonymously and share their stories and realize, oh, it's you, right? It's all of us. And then build up together. Like, how would you have done that pre the internet? Like, put an ad in the paper and hope that someone mails something to a PO box. Like, so we should not, I love a zine, but we're not going to do everything by like wheat pasting up a flyer. Like, we do need to use the technology. And I think the specific examples that you like Blue Sky, Black Sky, which is like a distributed network within that I think is like really promising. And we have to figure out, as part of the million things we have to figure out, is like, how do we continue as users of those things to hold those spaces accountable to the principles that they said, so they don't suddenly say, I can get a bag if I put ads on here, or I shift the algo so that you see, certain influencers. But yeah, the digital tools are totally necessary in this moment and really useful for widespread distribution of information. So don't like brick your phone just yet. But be really careful about what you're digesting from there.
I just want to make sure that we are being conscious of time. While so important for us to hear robust responses, because our questions are spot on, but we only have roughly 10, 12 minutes left. So at this juncture, we'll take as many questions left as we can, but we'll also allow just one of our panelists to respond to those questions.
Howard, I was planning on spending with these people. You're going to take that away from me now?
No, I'm not taking it away. I'm trying to make sure that you have your time. So go right ahead.
So 3 questions. No, but I could take the last one. I'll deal with Taylor tomorrow. We'll talk about more controversy. I want to let people know this, it's like my son over here, Jamal. We grew up and he's like my father over there. Very close to these people. But anyway, as a Renaissance man, first of all, Dr. Taylor, you talk about people who knock on your door and ask, but in reality, authoritative, dictator type shit, it'll kill you. And it'll kill everybody in this room. That's the first place they will come. Oh, smart people at UB gotta die, right? That's history. So one of the things I've been a little conflicted about, because I'm becoming, as I get older, get to be more of a Renaissance man, get to study more, do things. And so I came across this thing first I know what COINTELPRO probe means, what it's all about. I wouldn't have known that a week ago, but I know it now, based at the McCarthy era where they didn't have that, House of Committee to make them testify. So they had to do it, whoever had to do it a different way when McCarthy went down. But anyway, so they started that. But the kids me is at 1940, I want to go back in history a little bit, 49, the House of, when they were scared about the communists, the House of, I forget what it's called, but it's a committee on American committees, right? 49. May of 49, you got one of the greatest baseball players, one of the black champions of all time, Jackie Robinson, there to testify. You know what he was testifying about, Taylor? In 49, He was testifying to take down Paul Robeson, right? So who's the champ? So this is part of the problem I see going forward. So you got Jackie, a hero of ours. You know, we celebrate him, lionize and all this other stuff. He's there, he's been coerced. He's got to come in and basically begin the process of taking down Paul Robeson, a champion. You know, one of the, 17, 18, he was a valedictorian at Rutgers College. When he graduated, only Black. He became a lawyer, which I did not know. He was a lawyer because he graduated from Columbia Law School, valedictorian. When he finished, graduate All-American football player, one of the greatest voices of all time, big-time actor, all those different things. He gave up a lot of celebrity, making over $100,000 in the 30s over in Europe with Othello and all this other stuff. Huge celebrity. We gave a lot of that up to be a champion of the work against neoliberalism because he'd been treated better over there, the communist country of Russia. In fact, he sent his son over there. What I'm all conflicted about going for Paul Robeson is it started to erase him. It started, to belittle him, diminish him, because he was like a huge champion for the causes that we're talking about today. One of the first. But a lot of people in this room probably don't know who Paul Robeson was. Didn't know what he did, what he done at that time, because essentially they did a very good job of erasing him. Diminishing him, he died at 76, so he lived a pretty long time, but we don't lionize him. We don't have celebration. We do name things after him, like the Paul Robeson Theory in Buffalo. I never knew Paul Robeson until I started studying him. But what bothers me, what conflicts me, what I want you to answer, is how do we get past that? When you've got one hero, one star, one stud, Jackie Robinson, chorus at 49, to go to begin the process of eliminating somebody like Paul Robeson. And then I got a second question after you answer that one.
Well, I don't know about that.
Can I just say something real quick? This would literally be 10 seconds. We have to call it out. Keonga Yamana Taylor, Dr. Henry Taylor's daughter, wrote this amazing piece in the New York Magazine about Ibram X. Kendi, a person who sort of was a part of hijacking the Black Lives Matter movement with this garbage, How to Be an Anti-Racist book. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to call it out. We need to rely on our Black studies scholars to call them out. We as scholars here need to call out the bullshit from other people who are hijacking the moment.
Real quick, I mean, Dr. Bates and I were talking about this earlier. So in academia, especially when a new theory, concept, method comes online, everybody jumps on it, right? And so when critical race theory was getting big in public administration, mostly white scholars were publishing quicker, faster, because they were already at institutions that had the infrastructure for them to do certain things. A lot of us within this space, and I was saying this to the students earlier, this is not normal. Most academics are not usually engaged in community work. They don't do it until later on in their careers, and only in certain practitioner-based or professional fields where they're allowed to actually do this without worrying about publishing in the top article or the journal. And so the system itself conditions you not to do those type of work. What I will say is that a lot of us are still doing that within that space too. And a lot of it goes unrecognized. And so even in my writing, a lot of times I'm debating with people in the field because I'm like, you're wrong. You're just horribly wrong. And you're producing students are doing just bad work out here. That's leading to bad policy recommendations. But because you're at the top schools or like quintessential schools, you have the stage more so than somebody else will. And so I think for a lot of us is like, how do we kind of counter that knowledge kind of mobilization within this space, but also be in community with the people that we're working to know what we're actually supposed to be doing at any point in time. And so that erasure is always going to happen, right? The banning books out of certain things. They just took historical pieces out of the city of Philadelphia. You know, there's museums that are getting torn down or banned or stricken down of all the artifacts that they have. And so these are questions about what is the role of history in kind of promoting these type of things. I think Black History Month is not just a day of history or not a month of history or remembrance, it's a month of instruction. And so the same ways that they're erasing things today, these are, to your point, these have been ongoing. And so it's up to us to reclaim that history and write ourselves back into history to make sure that those stories are carried forward.
Sure. Please, go right ahead. Use your mic though. If you're
sorry, been able to take advantage of is the thing of that fact he controlled Congress. They abdicated their duties, right? They're just not doing what they're supposed to do to check that power. Because you look at the Constitution, the number one article is dealing with Congress, and number two is the executive branch. Well, number two is running the whole show right now. So what I'm saying here is that one of the things that people are, I think, beginning to say, I think it has a lot of validity, is the fact that we got to get empower Congress in a sense. One of the last things that we do to deal with this stuff, to deal with authoritarianism, we talk about Trump and his people around him, those think tanks and all that really wanted to do it. He just wants to get paid. The think tanks wanted to take over to me. But the thing is that midterms, we got to win the midterms. We got to have put more of a roadblock in front of this stuff. And one of the roadblocks is to invigorate Congress. They could do some of these things so he don't bastardize the JFK Center and all the other stuff.
absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think there's one last question, right?
Yeah, I'm sure you want to close, but thankfully this is brief. I am, oh, there it is. All right, so for anyone who wants to take it, or maybe all of you, if you can do it in one sentence, what do you think that children are learning from this political moment? And what do you think that they will need to flourish in inhumane conditions to have the chance to flourish?
A nice closing question, and one that I would like to answer myself, but I'm going to acquiesce to the panel. Go right ahead. No, I actually do want you all to have the closing words. So Dr. Bates, would you start that out?
I mean, I think that what children are learning in this moment realistically depends very much on who they are around. Because unfortunately, I think there are children who are being taught in this moment to that domination and prejudice is natural and normal. And there are other children who are being taught that, bravery and love and a spirit of justice is possible. But I hope there's more of the latter than the former. But I don't know that that's true. And I think that's something that we'll have to reckon with as adults in this world, and as educators in particular, when we encounter those people who are children today who are getting lessons that we wish we weren't getting. How I think that children could flourish is, I think children are people. So I think it's the answer about how people can flourish. I think not thinking children are people is actually a huge part of our problem in our society today. And maybe this also speaks to my sister who was asking about, how can I not just be struggling all the time? I think we must create little moments, protected moments of where we are practicing this world that we want, where we're treating one another with compassion, we're finding real deep joy, real rest, real creativity in our spirit, not hashtag Black joy, but really protected moments in time where we're with people we care about and we're remembering our own spirit and the things that we want to be in this world. I think that's really essential for our replenishment and our ability to keep moving things forward. And also because we have to practice the thing that we want to see. And we can't only practice fighting, and we can't only practice struggle. We also have to practice the love. So I think that would be good for children, and I think that would be good for all of us.
Yes.
Let me just say one.
Go right ahead. No, absolutely.
I agree with Lisa that when we say children, we have to say what children, because there's a lot of children that are being taught that authoritarianism, that whiteness and white supremacy is the way to go. And it's deep in the culture. We don't want to admit how deep it is in the culture. But as I always say, people talk about how bad and awful slavery was as a system. But remarkably, they never posed the question, if slavery was so bad, how could it last so long? 240 years. So with the kids that we work with, those kids are only going to flourish when their parents and guardians flourish, and when we transform and build the neighborhoods in which, and the communities in which they live. And so we think that we need to shift our thinking from how will this group do or how will that group do, but focus on how can we transform the places where they live into spaces that will enable them to flourish, to grow, and to be the very best that they can be. And to me, that's the thing that I think that we have to do. And I think that we have to teach them about a world where you put others ahead of yourself. And by that, I mean to say one of the greatest enemies that we face is selfish individualism. That's why you end up with people trading, doing horrible things to each other. Because they always find people who will do this thing because of selfish individualism. And so we have to teach our children the kinds of values that we want to live by, that the pack is only as strong as the weakest wolf, and that we have to work toward building that collective and building that community and fighting to transform the spaces. And the children will be transformed as they fight to create and build a better world. That's what I believe.
Well, I think we echoed that in many ways. Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Dr. Dantzler and Dr. Williams, I want to make sure you had a final word as well. Oh, right, yeah, look at it, threw the ball right back over here, yeah. That's right, that's right, that's right, that's right, that's right. Well, first of all, before I say anything, I want to say thank you. Thank you to this robust panel. And I cannot say that enough, because the title, Reimagining Black Futures During the Age of Authoritarianism, 100 Years of Celebrating Black History, we have made that happen tonight in a new way of understanding what we need to think about, not only for the future, but also for the present. Because oftentimes when we think about reimagination, we think about it in a futuristic sense, but we really need to think about it in status quo, present day, right now. So again, what a great panel. And I want you all to give them a round of applause, but I'm not done after your applause. Tremendous, tremendous. Dr. Taylor, Dr. Bates, Dr. Dantzler, Dr. Williams, thank you so very much. I also want to thank our audience in person and also on Zoom. You have been gracious, warm, but you've also been open to hearing what we can think about for a better world, a world that is not violent in terms of its systems and oppression, but a world that we, each of us, can make a positive difference. So thank you, and thank you for all of the questions and comments as well. I also want to thank my dean colleague, Dr. Julia, my friend. Thank you so much for the opportunity to partner with you in this wonderful endeavor. Julia and I actually have a history, because we both also worked at a previous institution together as well. Little did we know that we would be here at the wonderful University at Buffalo. So thank you for that. I know that there are some other closing remarks very briefly, and I think they're from some students. Am I correct? Is that right? All right, all right. I appreciate that. And Emmanuel, I appreciate you steering me in the right direction. So once again, I'm pleased just to be able to serve in this capacity as moderator. One of the things that we elevate in the School of Social Work, particularly now, is that everything that we do is vital. Our work is vital. Our elevation of humankind is vital, and we cannot negate that at all. So I know that all that we talked about tonight is vital, and we have to continue the good fight. So Henry, give us the last word. I'll give you this. Is it on?
Are you on? Are you on now?
And I'm happy to give you mine.
Hello?
There it is.
Yeah, it's on. In closing, I think that I want to thank everybody for coming out, but I also want to thank our two deans. At this moment in time, I see many people kissing the rain and hiding in the basement, waiting for the storm to go by. And I just want to acknowledge the type of courage and leadership that it takes for people in these positions to place so much emphasis on the truth. On the truth. We've had a hard discussion tonight. One of the few places in the country where people won't have these kind of hard discussions. But we're having these hard discussions because we're dealing with realities. We're dealing in realities that people in this building live under terror. The fears that ICE and that Gestapos will take them, or friends and family. That's real, that's happening. We live in a moment where university professors are afraid to teach. I came from Ohio State University here, and they're afraid to teach. And we have the freedom to be able to speak the truth. And so I recognize that in this moment, a lot of people are afraid of the truth. So, I celebrate the panelists. And if you can't get across the border, apprentice, you can stay at my house. And they may lock the doors and keep Jamal out of the medical school. He's gotten somebody's NIH grant in trouble. So Black History Month is about the truth. It's about the courage to speak the truth. It's about the celebration of radical democracy. And radical democracy means that we celebrate our differences, we celebrate our fights and our debates, because we know that it's through these fights and these debates that we reach a higher truth. And at the end of the day, tonight, and all of our hard and tough discussions have been around one single thing. How do we really live in a world where everybody resides in a neighborhood that is healthy, prosperous, and joyful? And we place a lot of emphasis on joy, because joy is bigger than happy. Joy is that wonderful feeling you have that is hard to describe. You just know, I'm joyful. And we want everybody to have that. I was on TV the other day, and the reporter asked me a question. Why are you in planning talking about this? Why not history? Why not someplace over in the humanities? And I said, I won't speak for them, but I'll speak for us. Because as planners and architects, we build the world in which people live. We build the buildings. We design the communities. And the question that faces us, the tension that we must always deal with, will we build communities that place people over profits, or build communities that place profits over people? And so where else should we have this discussion about the type of world that we want to live in but here? So thank you for coming out, and thank you for spending this time with us, and continue to fight for truth and the creation of a better world. Thank you.